I am thrilled today to have Brad Ferris on the podcast. Brad is the co-founder and COO of Agency Growth Team, a full-service recruitment firm for marketing agencies, specializing in account manager and client success managers. He joined Clinic Growers in 2019 and helped scale the agency to seven figures in under 18 months. In his free time, Brad's the account management coach in Josh Nelson's seven-figure agency program and speaks frequently in masterminds, on podcasts, and in private sessions on evidence-based best practices for scaling small businesses. Brad, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author, and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
And I'd love to start with you sharing some of your story with our listeners, and particularly around your journey and your development as a leader. How did you get started?
It's way back in the day. I was working at McDonald's, right? And worked at the front desk. And remember, it was a couple months in, they said, hey, do you want to train somebody? And I said, sure. And they gave me a little team leader or team trainer. And then, you kind of go to a couple of sessions that they have on education and stuff like that. And I think I got into kind of their little training program. I was a swing manager, which is kind of like the junior manager, pretty much through my first degree. Got to attend a Fendelini leadership course at the time, which was kind of real fancy and a big deal. And that was kind of the first time that someone told me, like, leadership is lonely, but in a good way. And I was like, what does that mean? Right? You're 23 years old. You're thinking like, and they're explaining to you that, you never take any of the credit. It's always your team. And if something goes wrong, it's all on you. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds like, but maybe that's what I'm going to do. Right. And honestly, all through my education, through sports, through my career, people continue to come to me and ask, either to lead or to help or to assist. And progressively over time, I think that's when I kind of found my entrepreneurial spirit that had always been there. And thought to myself, yeah, like, if I love leading, then why wouldn't I lead in more parts of my life? So, not done, 44 years old almost, and still moving strong towards it. But I don't know that I'm okay giving other people decision-making choices and stuff. I kind of feel like, part of it's probably control.
Yeah, I get that. I think that's something that every leader listening can probably resonate with.
Mhm.
So how did you get from McDonald's to marketing?
So I actually thought maybe I would have we go with these visions as a young teenager, what you would do. I actually thought I would go work in corporate as a marketing person for McDonald's, right? Because they always had point of purchase sales. Obviously, they were a successful company and, you go to meet different individuals within the organization. So thought to myself, okay, well, I'll go do my business degree, right? And then left McDonald's and started kind of working part-time in a hospital emergency room, just kind of as like it was called a unit clerk, but basically like a glorified secretary at the time. Was paid really, really well. And I was like, you know what? Why don't I be the CEO of the hospital? So I went and did my nursing degree. And what I found out was that was actually one of my truest callings was being at the bedside with individuals, helping them really fill that bucket, right? We always talk about kind of like what fills your bucket, right? That was mine. So I spent about 13 years at the bedside, not thinking about, running the hospital anymore, because that just seemed like a crazy job. And, started helping some of my medical colleagues, doctors that own practices. They would come to me on a night shift asking for advice, or they would say, hey, what would you do in this opinion? And I would, I started slowly running those practices for them. Worked in a private equity firm for about 3 years, and met Brad, my business partner. Saw High Level for the very first time for anyone that was back in early 2019. And was like, okay, I'm ready to make the jump into being an entrepreneur all by myself. Had made enough mistakes under other people's money that I was like, why don't I go make some of my own? And actually, I've never been happier.
And in 5 years, Wow. I mean, what a ride. I mean, can you imagine talking to yourself back in 2018, early 2019, saying, hey, in 5 years, this is what it's going to look like? Well, what would your 2018 self have said?
I probably would have been still cocky enough to think that I could have done it. And I would probably say, I'd probably say to myself, COVID would have to stop me from getting there any sooner.
Oh,
Right. I
wow.
think that's one of the things that I really felt frustrated by was, COVID, a global pandemic had to happen for me not to get there at 3.5 years instead of getting there at 5. Right. We have 3 young children. I love the balance of working from home remotely. I finish my day. I go right to them right away. My wife was here having lunch with me just before I joined you. Um, that element of freedom, I don't know that I ever thought I would get as a nurse at the bedside. You're always working someone else's schedule. You're doing things to benefit the patients that you're taking care of. And to have the ability now to decide where I want to invest my time and energy is a very it's a very liberating feeling.
No, so often when people are really good at something, and you obviously are operating not just as a partner, a business owner, a leader, and now coaching other leaders, but as you get started, you begin to find success, and you have to hire other people to help you with fulfillment. When you were at that point in your journey with your business, and you were having to bring other people on, was that challenging for you? Because leadership's a different skill. It's one thing to be good at business or at marketing, but leading other people, that can be incredibly challenging. But what were some of the difficulties that you hit along that journey?
One of the challenges that I had early on wasn't necessarily finding people to apply. It was people that shared the same values, vision, work ethic, or maybe even work ethic, maybe controversial. Maybe it was more the inspiration that they would have each day to come and fulfill a role. I remember putting on my scrubs and feeling like every single day I was going to make a very massive difference in the life of somebody. And when we were starting the entrepreneurial journey of growing our agencies, you would see people that clearly in their energy level and their interest level were quite a few steps down. So I would say that was a challenge because the vast majority of people that I met, maybe 90%, didn't meet my expectation of what they were going to bring to the table. But it actually gave you a lot of relief when you did find the 10% because you could get along with them much easier, right? The rapport that you were building with them was very straightforward and streamlined. They would come in right on day one and they would take the initiative on something versus not. I just wish that there had been more of those people, or I had been skilled enough to find them a little faster and a little bit earlier. But that would, I say, would be the biggest struggle. Was I think there were times that I'm always a Shrek fan when I say that'll do, donkey, that'll do. You kind of like, you look at someone and you think, I think that person will be fine, and you're correct with yourself. They're fine. They're not exceptional. And most of my day now is focused on trying to find exceptional people.
So the question everybody's thinking right now, how do you find exceptional people?
One, it does come down to branding. I will be very transparent. I think, your reputation is everything. I do podcasts obviously because I want to give back to the community. I'm also looking to make sure that I have a good stage from that people can look at, oh, I'd like to work for that person or with that person or, learn from that person. So branding, I think people discount a lot. I think having that vivid vision, what is your company? What are you about? Who do you help? Who do you serve? Who do you focus? Right. That kind of, whether it's faith-based, whether it's intent-based, I think is really important for people. I think anyone coming to a business should know probably within the first 30 seconds, is this a business that aligns with my values, with my goals? I have a mindset coach. I've shared that before. Mike has always said to me, your job as the owner is to inspire everyone that this is the best long-term place for them to grow their career, their knowledge, and their opportunity. So I think one of the things that I always bring into any job posting, interview, podcast, say like this one, is bringing that energy so that someone knows that this isn't a normal day off for me. This is, something that obviously you and I, we worked hard to get to this point, to be on the podcast today, and just be present for those people.
Yeah, I think that if somebody's looking at you online, the podcast that you're on, the businesses that you've built, I think a lot of people might be looking and saying, yeah, Brad never really had to deal with the challenges that I deal with. His journey's just been up and to the right. He's never had to struggle and wrestle like I do. If somebody's sitting across from you and they tell you that, what is your response?
I was a fertility nurse for 5 years. As a grown man at 26, I had to learn more about the menstrual cycle and anything else that probably most guys would. To my knowledge, at that time, this was 2010, I was the only male nurse that I knew of in North America. There were a couple of other friends that ended up joining, over the years, or I would meet people, or I would speak, and I would inspire, and I certainly wasn't the first. But yeah, you want to talk about challenges? Trying to convince a woman to trust someone who's never had a period, to advise them or to coach them or to support them through a challenge. I worked in pediatric oncology for a period of time, for almost a year and a half. I worked in an epilepsy program. It might seem that the success is there and, that the struggle is not. But I grew up in a very middle income type of family. I'm proud that I put myself through school and no one else was there to support me. I think, yes, Mike, my coach, often says, people are going to be jealous of your accomplishments, but not the work that it took to get there. And I think one of the things for any of us that achieve success, yes, some people are able to get there and maybe they don't look back and appreciate. I still go to Costco and get jumped by middle-aged women that look at their teenager and say, she helped make you, which is very awkward and bounced. But it's intended to represent the impact that you had in those people's lives at any given time. And I can say that. I can say that I helped create over 2,000 lives in my lifetime and however many I saved. So yeah, I take, I don't take that as a negative. If anyone ever said like it wasn't hard or difficult, you only know the path that you're facing. And I think, we're going to get into that as you elaborated, right? Like, where do you spend your time? Where do you spend your focus? I've shared with you too, a lot of the time our problems are just between our ears. And it comes down to our mindset.
100%. You are a husband and you're a father. That is often one of the greatest challenges leaders face, is learning how to balance those most important relationships in our life with running a business, leading a team, serving clients. All of the different parts of your life are in tension much of the time. How do you find that place of health and sustainability in the midst of those things?
Yeah. So mutual coach that you and I both know once told me that he kept a picture on his desk to remind himself of his family and wife when he was making decisions. I actually keep them behind me. So my boys and my wife. And one of the things that my wife always said to me is the wedding photos from our wedding. She's like, why do you always love that photo? And I was like, because it always reminds me that I still have to hold you and catch you and support you, right? That if I don't do it properly, we both go down together, because I could easily just fall with her onto the ground as well. It's a graceful, beautiful photo of us caught in a moment that obviously one of the happiest days of my life. But yeah, balancing growing a business and still growing small humans is probably, I think, a challenge on its own. I have three boys under the age of 12. They don't know how much work I obviously put in during the work hours, but I'm here with them in the mornings. And then when they get home from school, I'm pretty much always finishing up. It's rare for me to miss a bedtime or a story or a hockey game. Obviously my business has given me the opportunity that many other people don't have, and I'm conscious of that. But I did shift work, right? I worked midnights. I did, like, when the time change goes back and instead of 12 hours, you do 13. Um, I think that those are reminders to all of us that, hard work does pay off. It doesn't feel like it in the moment, but then you look back and you're like, wow, that's what I accomplished.
As you look at your life today and you look forward, what is one thing that you want most? That's a good question.
People ask me that question all the time, and this might be a little bit of an odd answer. But I'm really content where I am. I've accomplished a lot of things at this point that I thought to myself, oh, nothing could get better than helping those 2,000 families. Nothing could help, curing those 12 or 14 kids of cancer and being a part of that medical team, right? That being on the 14th floor, the top floor of a fancy business building in a custom suit with a really nice watch, wouldn't do it. I got to do a lot of those things before I got kids. And now I think to myself, I have this amazing opportunity to grow and raise 3 young men to be the best versions that we want young men to be. And I often talk about, with other dads of young men, when they're going from that cub stage, right, and moving on. That's actually probably where I focus most of my time is making sure that they're making good decisions, that they're balanced emotionally, that they're supported, right? That it's not the man up, but it's also like, you can define masculinity in a positive way rather than sometimes how it's defined in a negative way in the media. And at the end of the day, if I'm leaving this earth with them being, 10%, 20% better than myself, I'm going to feel really accomplished.
I love that. And I love that your answer to that is not around, more revenue and a bigger business or more businesses or more. It's not. It's about the relationships that matter most to you. And I think that's telling about the person that you are, Brad. I think that's telling about the life that you're building very intentionally.
I love money. I won't lie. I love watches, right? I have the things that, I love. And, we're going to go to Australia next year, probably South Africa. It's going to be built around experiences with my young family, going on those types of flights to see those places that I've been in the world that they haven't been yet. I'm just, I think as I get older, and I'm not even old yet, still get older, I find myself in those moments, just when I'm almost taking those snapshots, don't forget, right? I usually have a camera around with me all the time. And my wife will say, like, what are you doing? I'm just taking the moment, right? I'll look back on it later on and I'll be like, that was the feeling, that was the emotion, that was the memory. But I do spend a lot of time thinking about the future. Like, I'm very competitive. I may not show much on the podcast, but like, I want to make $1 million next year. And there's not very much that I feel like is going to get in the way of me doing it. But it also, interesting story that I shared with you before was in, 2020, 2021, I went to a Tony Robbins event. And obviously, hugely impactful individual in the world, Tony Robbins. Everyone's there, they're jumping around. It was a great party, like great time. And he kept talking about trying to get to peak state, right? All this meditation and this jumping and this yelling was around getting yourself. I realized probably by the second day, I wake up like that every day. My mind every day is on business and accomplishment and achievement and what can I do? And it was starting to have an impact on my marriage, and it was starting to have an impact on my 3 young children at the time. And what I realized was I needed to use meditation to bring myself down to a normal level, that when I'm in these walls working on my business, I can be in peak state for 8 hours, but then I have to put it on pause and leave it in this room to then give the time and attention to others. And I think some of us don't talk about that battle of like the really driven people in the world. I see that in them as well. And I'm like, okay, you got the same problem that I have, right? It's 24/7 all day long. So when I'm at an agency event, as you've seen me, I love that for 5 days because I'm in peak state whole time, right? But when I come home, I have to understand that there's a time and a place for it. And that's not when the kids want to kick the soccer ball or they want to read a book or they want to do those things. My mind needs to be on them rather than on.
I really like the way you phrase that. And I can resonate so deeply with that. I'm standing talking to you right now from my office at home, and there's a door right here. And I often visualize that door as the boundary of what I do with my business. the coaching, the writing, the speaking, so much that is centered here. This is home base. But when I walk through those doors, it's about my family. And that is a tension, that is a struggle. And that's a difficult thing because they don't see me the way other people see me, with what I do vocationally. They see me as dad. They see me as William, as husband, and that's it's a tension. And I love the way you describe that about being so purposeful. And I hope our listeners are latching onto that, because learning how to do that well, that's a skill. And it is not one that I think any of us are born with or are great at, particularly if we're focused on high performance. Yep. You have to continue to level up, Brad. Your business, your team, your clients, they need you to operate at a higher level as a leader today than they did 3 years ago. And that same thing is going to be true 3 years from now. What do you do to continue to level up your game so that you're able to be the leader that they're going to need you to be in 3 years?
So my very first session with my mindset coach, this is back in the private equity days. I was a lot more arrogant, and he specialized in helping senior professionals, senior executives get to that next level. And I was like, 32, 33 at the time. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what's this old guy going to teach? Right. Again, just very resistant. Right. And thinking to myself, I have a strong mindset. Like, I'm a healthcare professional. What do I need this for? Actually didn't do any research on them whatsoever. Right. Sat in and very well prepared man. Right. Kind of already had probably piped me a little bit ahead of time. He just shot his resume across the table. And as I'm reading all of the Fortune 500 companies that he had led teams in, I was like, all right, I probably want to pay attention, right? So I think that was my first opportunity where I actually opened my mind to, okay, I'm the person that knows me best, but there's going to be individuals out there that will support my development. And the faster that I grow, the more I'll be able to achieve. And for a young, ambitious, professional, that actually was instrumental for me, right? So not only did I start meeting with him weekly, but even now, almost a decade later, I'm meeting with him every 6 weeks, sometimes just to talk about the smallest challenge that I have in my team or an issue that I'm having with my own mindset. And a lot of it now has moved from I'm good, but how do I support a young team that's growing, that needs my attention? How do I lead as I enter my kind of more silver years like he was in at the time that he was coaching me? And I find that a lot of my time with my businesses is, I'm the chief operating officer, but it's now the optimizing officer. You're spending more time with your team. How do you skill them and level them up so that they can level their teams up? Rather than just kind of walking around it being all about me, they're going to achieve far more through their teams than I'm going to be able to in the 8 hours that I have in a day. And that's actually having more impact on the businesses overall and their success and the revenue that they're generating. So it's hard because, like I said, it's lonely. You kind of have to almost be humble too and realize now it's not about me anymore. Mm-hmm. It's what do I do to support this entire team to help us grow? Because before day one, it's you inside of the business driving everything moving forward. Well, now it's like you're just driving one of the buses. Right. Yeah. Or you're a passenger at the back being like, okay, I think we're going the right way.
That's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
In that posture where you are consistently and intentionally learning, and I see that in you, you are continuing to grow and continuing to learn, investing in coaches, investing in places and opportunities where you're going to be challenged, where you're going to grow. I'm curious, is there a book that has made a big difference in your journey that you would recommend to the leaders who are listening? Hey, if you haven't read this would be a good read.
This one's a little bit, it's positive in a way, but I would say that's a lot more of a serious. It's a book called Being Mortal. So I read this when I was in my, I was doing, I can't pronounce his last name. It's a good Indian fellow. But it's a doctor who explains the death process of his dad. and like where he has his regrets, where he has his achievements. And I was reading that book through as I was going through a palliative rotation in nursing school, and met a really cool lawyer that was, like, he was one of the biggest lawyers in North America, and I didn't know it at the time. And he had recommended the book to me, and then he ended up passing away. And I thought to myself, wow. So it's a good book just on, I think that's where I get some of my like intention in life is, you don't get to go back and redo those conversations that you have with your grandparents, with your parents, with the people close to you. I'd love to quote Extreme Ownership and all the other wonderful books that are out there, but I think sometimes we probably watch and listen, the audiobooks and reading the books that are only based on success and what people are achieving. And I think that is probably a book, I have it upstairs somewhere, where I'll read once every couple of years just to almost give myself like a little bit of like a grounding. Because, whether you've got 4 more months or 40 more years, our time is limited, and the impact that we leave, we want it to be substantial.
No, I have not read that. And it sounds
Oh.
like something that I would really like to read. Thank you for sharing that.
It's Atul Gawande. That's the book.
Excellent.
Immortal.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Brett, you serve, and we've talked about this in passing, but I mean, you serve in a number of different capacities as founder and partner in a number of different enterprises. Would you share a little bit about that and what your role is in each one of these? Because I think that's something that a lot of people, like, they're like, I'm trying to focus on one thing, but you have found a tremendous success in actually thinking beyond just one thing.
I had this great prof in business school. He had been married 7 times. He would give this advice at times about relationships, and you would just pass it off. But he also would share really valuable insights from business. And one of the things that he always shared with me was do what you do best. And at the time I thought to myself, what does that mean? Right. And as you get into the entrepreneurship journey, you start to learn that there's always something shiny or something that's grabbing your attention. We call it shiny object syndrome. But if you really just focus on doing one thing and doing one thing at an expert level, you can either continue doing that and probably make a lot of money financially, or you can pass that skill or that learning off to another individual that allows you to then go and do something else. So one of the things I've been very fortunate with is I see the shiny object and I'm not done with it. But I'm going to master the one thing that I'm going to master, whether it's organic gardening or it's how to fly a plane or any of the weird things that I'm researching. That my wife will be like, "You're onto this now," and I will obsess. I will absolutely obsess about that one thing until I get to an expert level, and then I'll move on to something else. And I think that that's probably just a character trait that's unique to me and a couple of other people. But your success is going to lie in your mastery. Right. So once you achieve that level of mastery, there's obviously more on top of that. But I think just as I don't know where, maybe it's intelligence, maybe it's just my personality. I think a lot of people try to do too much rather than just saying it's okay to focus on this. I give myself a timeline. Part of it is also being a professional. As you know, we, any of us that are clinical have learning plans and dedicate time each year or each quarter towards a learning goal. And I think, that's one of the things I'm bringing into my teams is that same learning plan specifically around how to achieve, a challenge or acquire a skill. But yeah, for me, I think that's probably where I sit is just keep doing it. And then once you've got that done, you'll be able to move on to the next thing.
So good. I could continue this conversation for an hour, Brad. There's so much that you've shared that is worth a deeper dive. And I know our listeners are going to want to continue to learn from you and learn more about what you're doing. What is the best way for them to do that?
I'm going to start a podcast someday, but I haven't really done one right now. So obviously,
well, let me know when, because I'll subscribe. I'm in anytime.
I just like, with peers, with colleagues, on their podcast. So obviously to go to YouTube, I'm probably on 5 or 6 now, if not more at the time. Obviously Clinic Grower is our big flagship, medical agency. I have a very active LinkedIn. Facebook, not so much, but you can always basically connect with me on LinkedIn. I think it's Brad M. Ferris or something like that. If you're at any industry events, always call me out. I don't have best memory in the world, but I'll identify the faces and stuff like that. And again, like if I'm coaching or I'm in a coaching environment, just always submit a question. I'm happy to take the time either through the event or afterwards to reach out to mentor to make sure that we're giving value back. My goal is if it all just stays in my head, I'm not really helping very many people.
Well said. Brad, thanks for your time and your
Thanks, Rob.
generosity today in sharing so freely from what you've learned so far.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me for this episode today. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do two things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, if you don't have a copy of my newest book, Catalytic Leadership, I'd love to put a copy in your hands. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a copy for free. Just pay the shipping so I can get it to you, and we'll get one right out. My goal is to put this into the hands of as many leaders as possible. This book captures principles that I've learned in 20 plus years of coaching leaders in the entrepreneurial space, in business, government, nonprofits, education, and the local church. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. If you're ready to take a next step with a coach to help you intentionally grow and thrive as a leader, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to catalyticleadership.net to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, leaders, choose to be catalytic.
Thanks for listening to Catalytic Leadership with Dr. William Attaway. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Want more? Go to catalyticleadership.net.